Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday, December 2nd, 2011 INFOWARS Nightly News broadcast. I'm Aaron Dykes. Coming up, we have an exclusive interview with Pepe Escobar, Asia Times writer and geopolitical correspondent, to discuss Syria, Pakistan, what it means for China, Russia, and everything else on the geopolitical map. We also have exclusive reports from Alex Jones and Darrin McBreen. But first, we have probably more news than I've ever seen on the plate tonight, and unfortunately, it seems to go from bad to worse. Turns out the Goldman Sachs conspiracy theorists were right all along. That's Madison Rupert's report up on Infowars.com today, discussing how all along we've said insiders were getting tips from Hank Paulson. However, this isn't quite a brand new revelation, given the fact that in October 2009, Andrew Ross Sorkin exposed that Paulson met with the entire Goldman Sachs board in a hotel suite in Moscow in June 2008. During that meeting, Paulson spoke of the need for government to have the power to wind down troubled firms, offering a preview of his upcoming speech. That article breaks down this Reuters article, Hank Paulson's Inside Jobs, where today we learned that Goldman's meeting in Moscow was not some kind of aberration. A few weeks later, in July 28, 2008, all before the crisis began, Paulson met with a who's who of the hedge fund world in headquarters at Eaton Park Capital Management, a fund founded by former Goldman superstar Eric Mendich. So he was giving insider tips there. Many have broken down how it looks like there's enough information to criminally indict him and prosecute him. Meanwhile, we reported on this 2 years ago. Have you heard about the $16 trillion bailout the Federal Reserve handed to the too big to fail banks? Of course, the $700 billion was just a smokescreen for a far greater sum. As I mentioned, in 2009, we, as well as Bloomberg, reported on the $23.7 trillion in total commitments from the Federal Reserve during the bailout. Now there's a GAO government report breaking down $16 trillion of that money and where it went. The banks are, of course, predictable and familiar at this point. Citigroup got $2.5 trillion, Morgan Stanley some $2 trillion, Merrill Lynch almost $2 trillion, Bank of America $1.3 trillion. Barclays, Bear Stearns, Goldman Sachs, Royal Bank of Scotland, Deutsche Bank, UBS, JP Morgan Chase, Credit Suisse, and all the others are also on the list. An incredible sum of money given away from taxpayers through our bizarre commitment in the Federal Reserve. If there's ever been a better time to put a spotlight there, it's now. Former New York Federal Reserve stooge Geithner and current Treasury Secretary, meanwhile, is accusing opponents of reform of jeopardizing the financial sector's strength, saying he forces working against the reform. He said forces working against the reform were blocking appointments to oversight positions, cutting funding, proposing new legislation to repeal parts of the Dodd-Frank law, and trying to slow regulation in the hopes of watering it down. That's just rearranging chairs on the Titanic, as you can imagine. Meanwhile, former Goldman Sachs stooge and New Jersey Senator, as well as Governor John Corzine, executive of MF Global at the time it went belly up, has now been subpoenaed. He will have to appear before a congressional panel and explain his role in that firm's collapse, with still more than $1.2 billion in missing customer money. I wouldn't expect too much, though. Don't hold your breath for true justice there. But at least he has to speak up for himself. We've had Gerald Celente and others on the program. Other incredible news today, Wisconsin governor wants to introduce fee to protest. Exercising First Amendment right will cost $50 per hour per Capitol Police officer. That's Steve Watson's report. And they supposedly have some law already on the books in the state where you can be liable for using state facilities. It goes on to explain how inside the Capitol protest, groups of 4 or more will have to apply for a permit 72 hours before and pay. Protest outside the Capitol, groups of 100 or more would have to pay, as well as for damage and cleanup costs. Kind of a funny quote here. I'm a little skeptical about charging people to express their First Amendment opinion. Law professor Edward Fallon told reporters you can't put a price on the First Amendment. He's a little skeptical, or it's supposed to be a fundamental right never to be violated. Just disgusting. Of course, the indefinite detention bill passed 93-7 in the Senate. Similar version in the House has gone through. They have to reconcile it. The Senate last night codified into law the power of the U.S. military to indefinitely detain an American citizen with no charge, no trial, and no oversight whatsoever in the passage of S. 1867, the National Defense Authorization Act. And though the White House has threatened to veto this bill, the fact that the Obama administration's lawyers yesterday reaffirmed their backing for state-sponsored assassination of U.S. citizens would suggest otherwise. And, of course, there are a number of executive orders and precedents of executive overreach, which already have many aspects of this on the book. But the idea of passing this legislation is, of course, nightmarish. Paul Joseph Watson has also uncovered an even worse amendment in this bill, which was narrowly defeated. This amendment would have made the Senate bill give it allowance to detain Americans even after they had been found innocent. The details of that report are up on INFOWARS.com and PRISONPLANET.com. But before you go to those websites, I do want to draw attention to a little bit of the details. Amendment number 1274 would have given the federal government the power to detain U.S. citizens until Congress declared the war on terror over, which we've been told is a never-ending, multi-generational conflict. The provision also gave the feds the power to keep an American incarcerated even if it were tried and found not guilty. So much monstrous legislation coming through this larger National Defense Act. Of course, Alex Jones and many other patriots have cried shame over it, but are ordinary Americans even paying any attention to it at all with Black Friday and the holiday season underway? To find out, we went to Darrin McBreen.
The National Defense Authorization Act empowers the U.S. military to operate on American soil. They can arrest American citizens and cart them off to detention centers anywhere in the world, basically turning the entire homeland into a battlefield and allowing the military to arrest individuals and detain them indefinitely without trial. Now, this violates every aspect of a free society by denying Americans their constitutionally protected right to due process. How do you think the average American is going to respond?
The same way they responded at the Kent State massacre when National Guard troops were used to fire live ammunition on students who were nonviolently protesting the Vietnam War. The American public was outraged.
The military is here to defend us, not to prosecute us and arrest us and throw us in jail. I think it's a sneak attack by Congress and people to, counter the movement on Wall Street.
These people are saying that the passing of the bill, basically it means to them that the Rubicon has been crossed, that this means America will become complete and possibly irreversible totalitarian military state.
Well, then our only hope is some defective armed force members.
I think that's our only chance, is the military needs to enforce our Constitution, and our congressmen are trampling over the rules that were established over 200 years ago. And that's the whole problem. There's too much corruption in the executive branch and in the congressional.
What would you say to active military who might be told to enforce this bill?
Listen, I'm a veteran of the United States Army, 31 uniform, airborne, and I'll tell you what, very simply we take an oath to protect this country from threats both foreign and domestic.
It's not good, it's not healthy for our democracy for the American Army to be involved.
For those people who say that, oh, it could never happen here, it could never happen to us, those are called the famous last words. Many times throughout history, situations have happened where governments have turned their military against its citizens. You know what? History repeats itself. If that eventuality does happen, you have to remind yourself that these are your brothers and sisters and neighbors and people you went to school with. And remember what you're truly fighting for. It's for our Constitution, not for these puppets who are actually our servants who have run amok.
Now, Stewart Rhodes, the founder of Oathkeepers, recently appeared on the INFOWARS Nightly News, and he warned people that we are now at the point where all that will save liberty in America is another American revolution.
But really, you should see this as a declaration of war against the American people. That's how we should see it. We need to stop this right now. If we don't, Alex, I do believe that there will be no recourse except another revolution. Otherwise, we are going to be lost. We will be put in the same position as the Founding Fathers were in 1775.
I want to tell the military and police, The globalists are going to sit offshore and watch you get chewed up in a fight with the American people. It's very important that police and military really make a decision now which side they're going to be on.
The military, you're right. Choose now whom you shall serve. Either you are, I'm talking to the military out there especially, either you are a son of the Republic and you will defend the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, or you are a traitor to your country and you are nothing but a lowly dog, an obedient dog to the powers that be. Choose now whom you shall serve.
There's a lot of constitutionalists out there who are in such an uproar that they are saying that this bill places us in almost exactly the same position that our forefathers were in when they were forced to take up arms in defense of liberty back in 1775.
Well, to those people I would say it's a culmination of things that have put us in that position, and I would agree that the architects, the great and highly intelligent architects that constructed our infrastructure, the way we do business and the way we do politics and the way we live here in America, they would turn over in their graves and they would be very ashamed of us and how far we've let this go.
Indefinite detention without due process leaves citizens without the legal protection of the Constitution, and it strikes at the very heart of the essence of U.S. law. It is positively shameful that any elected representative would even consider voting for such an assault on so sacred a fundamental value as the right to due process. I'm Darrin McBreen for INFOWARS Nightly News.
And of course, John McCain is the one who introduced legislation in 2010 along very similar lines. Great report from Darrin. He obviously put a lot into it, but we don't do what the mainstream media does, interview 40, maybe 100 people, and then show just the handful who fit in with our views. We're going to show you the other people who will accept any government power and probably even serve to enforce that undue power. Let's go to that side of the report now.
What do you think is going to be the response of American citizens once they start seeing American troops on the street?
I think that most people are going to be divided.
I don't do anything wrong, so I don't have anything to fear, so I'm not afraid of the military.
The military being on the streets of America, there's a new bill that's being passed.
It's a great idea. I'm all for it.
So you support to fight terrorism, military on the street?
Of course, I do.
So you think in order to fight terrorism, that would make you feel a little safer seeing military on the street?
Yeah. So I think the only people that are afraid of the military is people that commit crimes or, that are in criminal organizations. So.